Hey everybody, welcome back to Blackmagic Craft. A couple weeks ago, I made this piece of terrain here, and it includes this little floaty bit, which I think is really cool. But that was an afterthought while building it. I added it at the very last minute. It wasn't planned. I wanted to make a couple more pieces with this idea, but that were a little bit more modular and standalone, so they didn't have to be attached to this big other piece of terrain. And that's what I did this week. I'd need some chunks of foam for the stone, some sort of base to stabilize the pieces, and some kind of rod to create the elevation. This required thick foam. You could glue thinner stuff together, but the easiest way is to use foam that is thick. If you want to grab some of this, you can do so at my XPS supply store that I've set up. The link will be in the description. For the rods, I was going to use some wood dowels from the dollar store, but I only had one left. I ran out to the store to grab another pack, but they were all out. I had to think a little bit outside the box for a solution. I found some sponge brushes with thick wood dowel handles and some wooden spoons with thinner but longer ones. In order to embed enough of the dowel into the foam and have them be high enough, I decided I'd need to use the longer spoons. Before I carved any foam, I wanted to make sure that I could make bases that would work. This meant connecting the dowels to the wood discs, and I didn't trust just glue alone. I pre-drilled a hole in the bases, just eyeballing approximate center. I used a countersink bit so that the head of the screw would be recessed and not make the bases unstable. To avoid splitting the wood dowels, I also pre-drilled them with a bit that was just the size of the screw shaft. A drill press would have been great to make sure that this hole was drilled perfectly parallel to the dowel, but I did the best I could freehand. I mean, most people, including me, don't have a drill press on hand. I could then carefully screw the pieces together. Now, it's important to drive this screw by hand as all the wood is pretty delicate and you want to avoid splitting the dowel. Right before getting the screw fully tightened, I added some wood glue to the joint. Once dried, the combination of glue and a mechanical fastener should be more than strong enough to hold up a light chunk of foam. Now, feeling confident in my bases, I got to work carving the stone chunks out of foam. I did this entirely with a utility knife. A handheld hot wire cutter is a lot easier and definitely a lot safer, but a knife and snapping off chunks actually creates a better rock texture in my opinion. And again, not everyone has access to a hot wire tool, but pretty much everyone doing this hobby should have access to a knife. It's really important to take your time with this and keep your free hand safe and away from the blade. Don't get too comfortable or complacent while doing this. Always be mindful of where your hand is, since these types of cuts put a fair bit of force and pressure on your blade, and you could quite easily slip, get careless, and have a blade fly towards your other hand, causing a pretty nasty cut. So just take your time. The more effort you put into making a lot of variation in layers and directions of cuts, the more believable your stones will be. Since one of my dowels was kinda short, I made one stone a lot taller so that the final piece would be of a similar elevation to the others. If you're using a pack of dowels that are all the same length, which you should, this wouldn't be necessary, but having some of the stone chunks be different thicknesses would still help add a bit of variety to the set, which is always a plus. Now, my dowels didn't come out very plumb. One of them was really crooked, but as long as I attached the foam, making sure that the top surface was as level as I could get it, this wouldn't matter too much. To make this easier, I pre-drilled the foam with a drill bit the same size as the dowels. I filled the holes with some wood glue and slid the foam onto the dowel, trying to keep the top as level as possible. Once the glue dried, this would be locked in place and the crooked dowel would be kind of irrelevant. At this point, you could just paint. But if you want the foam to be a little bit more resilient long term, it would be worth coating it in some kind of protective layer, something like Mod Podge or glue or acrylic latex. I prefer using Vallejo ground texture for this. It adds some grit, which is nice, and it makes a far more durable surface than just glue or Mod Podge. It also creates instant texture on the top flat surface of foam. Usually I'd add some modeling compound to the flat areas, but I wanted to keep the weight as low as possible on these, so the texture paste is an ideal solution. This will take a little while to dry, and then they can be primed. Before I do that, let's take a second to talk about this video's sponsor, Archvillain Games. They're one of my favorite monthly model providers for 3D printing. For a crazy low cost, you get a bunch of ultra detailed pre-supported models, as well as additional material like adventure modules to use the miniatures in your D&D games. This month, they're adding a new monthly feature called Archvillain Relics at no extra cost. You'll now also receive a life-size 3D printable fantasy-themed prop. These will be split into manageable multi-part prints that can be printed on small format printers like a Frozen Mini. And of course, they will all be fully pre-supported. This month's theme is really cool and right up my alley. Speak of the Devil Act 2 adds a bunch of devilish creatures perfect for an adventure in the 9 hells. They can also be used as proxies for your favorite wargames. Speaking of which, Archvillain is in the process of developing their own skirmish game called Battle Rune. If you want to find out more about Archvillain games and what they offer, check out the link in the description. They are fantastic and I highly recommend them to anyone running an epic adventure. Thanks Archvillain for supporting this channel and the community at large. I hit everything with a black spray primer before moving on to painting. Realistically, this could be just base coated with black craft paint. It would be fine given the materials, but spraying it is just a whole lot faster. I wanted to give these a bit of a glowing hot magma look, so instead of my normal zenithal highlight, I went in with white ink and highlighted all the deepest crevices. Now, if you're one of those people that tunes out when there's an airbrush in the video, stick with me on this one. Trust me, the airbrush turns out not to only be unnecessary here, but also not the ideal choice. I used a variety of yellow, orange, and red inks through the airbrush to try and create that glowing molten stone effect. This was convenient, and it looked pretty decent while doing it, but the thing about inks is that unless you really go hard with your white highlights first, the colors become very subdued when dry. Normally this is a good thing for the type of terrain I make, but not here. These did not look hot or glowing. They just looked like stone that was colored a little bit orangey. So I busted out the old trusty craft paints and went to work redoing things. Applying the craft paint, which is much more heavy bodied than ink, makes it easier to have the color really pop on the dark surface. I went through the yellow, the orange, and the red all over again. And this time around, it looked a lot better, way more impactful. To give things a final bit of contrast and clean up some of the overbrushed bright colors, where they shouldn't be, I dry brushed all of the outer surfaces with a very dark gray, followed by a dry brushing of a lighter gray. This helped a lot, and I was much happier with the result. The last step was to repaint the black bases and dowels to clean them up and help make them disappear. I first did this with craft paint, which is fine, but it's not a very deep black when dry. It always looks slightly gray. I wanted these bases to be real black, to disappear as much as possible, and I remembered I had some ultra black Musso paint and decided to use that instead. Now I think these turned out really nice. I'm quite happy with them. They'd be awesome for an infernal adventure in something like Dungeons and Dragons, but they're also really cool wargaming terrain. Personally, I'm gonna end up using them for Idols of Torment scenarios. They complement these bridge pieces I made a little while ago perfectly. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button and let me know in the comments section below. If you want to pick up some tools or supplies for your hobby needs, blackmagicraft.ca. I have a bunch of essential equipment listed there. If you want to get that thick foam, link is in the description. Of course, if you like these videos I make and you want to help me keep making them, the best way you can do that is by supporting the channel on Patreon. I'd love to have you as the newest member of the Black Magic Craft Fellowship. And don't forget, check out Archvillain Games. Super awesome company with wicked cool minis. All right, that's it for this one. See you next time.